On February 6, 1970, Canadian police officer Bob Crawford was dispatched to settle a domestic dispute in St. Catharines, Ontario. Officer Crawford arrived at 237 Church Street, Apartment 1, and quickly settled the dispute. As he was leaving the apartment, another resident in the building frantically approached him. The woman pleaded for Crawford's help in her apartment, and he obliged. He didn't know it at the time, but Crawford was about to experience the strangest case of his career. In this episode, we will examine the frightening poltergeist of St. Catharines, Ontario. As Officer Crawford walked in the woman's apartment, he was astonished to see it was a complete disaster. Furniture was overturned, picture frames were broken, and there was a complete mess all over the floor. What he was told next would truly shock him, though. The woman who stopped him, named Barbara Page, informed him that the disarray was caused by some unknown force or ghost. Crawford decided to get more details, and he spoke not only with Barbara, but her entire family. Barbara had 2 sons, 11-year-old Peter and 8-year-old Mark. Her husband, John, was there as well. The family would tell him that the furniture had been moving by itself with no known cause. Perhaps even more bizarre, this had been happening the last 10 days. While Crawford was initially skeptical, he soon witnessed the paranormal activity himself. He saw a heavy dresser get knocked down by something. Crawford, convinced at this point, was unsure of what to do, so he called the Roman Catholic Church. He would speak with Father Stevens, and a short time later, Father Stevens would arrive at the Page household. Officer Crawford would be surprised to learn Father Stevens had been to the house just a few days earlier. Then, he experienced paranormal activity in the apartment. In particular, he saw a bed move away from the wall all by itself. Father Stevens pushed it back into place, and as he walked away, the bed moved back out again. The Page family was frightened at this point and was unsure what to do. Officer Crawford suggested everyone move into the living room to discuss options. As Crawford was walking out of the kitchen, he moved a chair under the table. While discussing what to do, the group would hear the eerie sounds of footsteps going across the living room. Everyone froze, and they listened as the footsteps went into the kitchen. Officer Crawford and Father Stevens then cautiously walked back into the kitchen. There, they would be shocked to see the chair had moved back out to the center of the room. A few moments later, police officer Bill Wire arrived. Wire was there to back up Crawford at the domestic disturbance call. When Wire heard about the events, he wasn't surprised though. Wire said just 1 month earlier, he had responded to a call from residents in the building. They complained of hearing odd noises all day and all night. Wire had the utility companies come out and investigate. However, nothing abnormal was found with their systems. Soon that night, Wire would eyewitness the paranormal activity himself. On a shelf sat a row of bowling trophies. Wire watched as they fell one by one off the shelf. He also noticed the hands on the kitchen clock being pushed around, seemingly by themselves. More supernatural activity occurred, and the officers speculated that it was tied to 11-year-old Peter Page. For instance, as Peter walked by, the officers noted how pictures would sway on the walls. After this, several times Peter was pushed up against the wall. Things would go from bad to worse for Peter, though, that night. As he sat in a heavy wooden chair, it suddenly levitated several feet off the ground and then threw Peter on the floor. The chair came down on him, and both officers had to lift it off him as it was so heavy. The activity continued all evening, with pictures falling off the wall, doors opening by themselves, and furniture levitating. The next day, Officer Crawford would stop by the apartment complex once again with Officer Richard College. Coincidentally, they were called over once again for a domestic disturbance report. That night, a man was arrested at the scene, and College would take him, putting him in the back of the police vehicle. As Collage was walking him to the car, a woman ran over to Officer Crawford and told him something bizarre was happening at the Page home. The woman informed him a bed was levitating by itself in the apartment. Crawford ran and grabbed College, and the two men rushed in the apartment. However, the bed had already fallen back down to the floor. In the apartment, the men talked with the Pages, and soon the paranormal activity would restart. It didn't appear to be as extreme as the night before, so the police left and informed the Pages they would check on them every night. Then, 5 days later, from when Officer Crawford first came to the home, the Pages would call the police. Several officers, as well as family of the Pages, showed up and saw the paranormal activity. At this point, there were multiple witnesses to the event, and the story was soon picked up by the press. The newspaper in the area, named The Standard, wrote an article titled "Ghostly Presence in an Apartment" on Church Street. It detailed what was happening in the apartment, and the story spread like wildfire. More reporters, paranormal investigators, and others arrived at the apartment. The Pages didn't like the attention and eventually went to Montreal for a short time. Once the attention calmed down, they returned to their apartment. Interestingly, in Montreal, no paranormal activity occurred. In addition, when they returned, there were no more reports of supernatural behavior. The family never went public and never talked about the event. The records from this story come from other eyewitnesses, such as Officer Crawford, and newspaper reports. Despite the short duration of the haunting, this case is considered to be highly legit by paranormal investigators. This is due to the large number of independent witnesses, many whom are deemed very credible. In addition, the family avoided the spotlight and never tried to gain money or fame from the story. Over the years, there's been much speculation around this case. It appears by all accounts that this was a poltergeist haunting. The spirit displayed the classic symptoms of a poltergeist by disturbing objects and also never manifesting. In addition, one person seemed to be at the center of the haunting, Peter. It's not clear why the haunting abruptly stopped and why it was so short too. Still, other poltergeist cases have been very short like this, and sometimes cases can last for years. One other question concerns why it started in the first place. No reason has ever been discovered. The apartment complex would eventually be repurposed from residential housing to commercial housing. It exchanged hands multiple times, including being converted to a pizzeria. All tenants reported no strange activity, and it appears now whatever haunted this property has moved on.